Since 1887, the Stonington Free Library has been a center for knowledge, ideas, creativity, and entertainment. It is a comfortable and welcoming community space for the town of Stonington, Connecticut, where all ages can explore, discover, gather, and learn within a building of distinctive and unique architecture. This video program is an evolution to expand the offerings of the library to share directly in your home or organization. Welcome to the Sunday evening lecture series made available to you by the Stonington Free Library.
So I'll start again. It really is such a pleasure to be able to welcome all of you from nearby and I think some very far away on behalf of Stonington Free Library to the first of our 2021 lecture series. But first, I want to thank Assistant Director Carla Amland for putting all this together and the wonderful job she's doing running our new program series, and also for the wonderful support of Library Director Michaela Hall. It just couldn't happen without them. You will all receive information about our upcoming programs via email and on our website, but I do just want to say that this Thursday, March 18th, we have Master Gardener Noreen Keppel, who will give us a talk on pollinators, a timely and compelling subject that affects us all, whether we're gardeners or not. So you can put that on your calendar. And this is a very special moment because it's just 1 year ago when our speaker this evening, Professor Stuart Vyse, had to cancel his program as our world came to a shuddering halt because of the pandemic. And here we are. We have found new ways to gather and to reach out to each other. And I'm very grateful to Professor Vyse, who so kindly agreed to present his talk on Zoom, which requires a special kind of preparation and effort. And we do appreciate that he's willing to do this. And also it means the loss of the post-talk gathering with wine, cheese, and book signings, and all the conviviality that we all so sorely miss. But we hope that will happen soon. So, but however, another accommodation to the times, our wonderful partners, Bank Square Books, have set up a link which you will find in your emails so that you can purchase the book. So I just point that out to you. So not all is lost. So it is my great pleasure to introduce our distinguished guest, our friend and neighbor, Dr. Stuart Vyse. Dr. Vyse has a doctorate in psychology and degrees in English literature. He is a fellow of the Association for Psychological Science and the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry. His main academic interests are in decision-making, behavioral economics, philosophy, behavior analysis, and belief in the paranormal, which actually all means that he is one of those rare people who are not prepared to accept the received wisdom and always wants to know where something came from, where we came from, how we got here, and the wonderful question that raises, where are we going? So he is really a gift. His teaching career has been at Providence College, URI, and Connecticut College, and he's the author of several books, which we have here in the library. His book, A Very Short Introduction to Superstition, is in the Oxford University Press Very Short Introduction series. As everyone knows who has attempted this, it is extremely hard to compress a wide and deep range of knowledge of a subject into a concise, clear, and informative short book. A short sentence saying exactly what you mean can take many, many days to write. And Dr. Vyse has accomplished this in his very engaging, highly readable, extremely informative book. And I cannot do better than quote the blurb on the back cover. A superb, succinct summary of the history of and psychology behind superstition. Stuart Vyse is such a marvelous writer and clear thinker. In fact, this book should be required reading for all humans susceptible to superstitions, which is to say, all of humanity. So it is with great pleasure and anticipation that I ask you to welcome Professor Stuart Vyse.
Thank you, Belinda. It's wonderful to be here, and we love our library here in Stonington. It is a wonderful space that has recently been renovated. I am lucky enough to be in the building today. I wish that you all could be here with me and that we could be spewing our aerosols without a thought the way we used to do. And I'm sure we will do again. But at least we can get together this way, and there are many people who can be with us. But thank you to Carla, to Michaela, and to Belinda for everything you do for this wonderful wonderful institution and for today too. Okay, it's nice. Okay, good. All right, so starting again, this is the book, and as Belinda very kindly said, it is a part of the Very Short Introduction series. It's a great series which I had no knowledge of before I was asked to write this book. And just so that you have a sense, when they say very short, they mean it in that this is the size of the book. It's really pocket size, and it's about this thick. And it's a wonderful series. Now I have several of them, and they're really wonderful. About a year ago, I bought the one that they have on viruses. I wonder why. So this is a book that is about the history of the word. And I will tell you as we go ahead that a lot of the story of the book and of superstition in general is about the fact that it is a word that is used in a particular way and has been over time. And then it talks about, the book is also about the origins of many of our commonly held superstitions. And of course, the psychology of superstition. I am a psychologist, and a little bit about the future of superstition. I'm not going to talk about much of that today because it's just too much. But I will say that it was actually a fairly difficult book to write for me because I am a psychologist, but this is really the whole story of superstition, which of course has a lot to do with history and other things. So, and there is no long version of this story. There's no single book that has attempted to do this before this book. And so I felt a great responsibility as I wrote it to sort of do justice to the topic, and I hope that I have. I wanted to say that I am not the only one. Just as an aside, by strange coincidence, Jonathan Post, who lives 2 blocks from me, right here in the little town of Stonington, has also written a very short introduction on Shakespeare's sonnets and poems. And he's writing, rumor has it he's writing yet a second one. I think this will be the only short introduction that I do. But what are the chances that 3, I mean, it is true that there are something like 650 of these books available on all sorts of topics. But what are the chances that 3 of them would result from a 2-block area in Stonington, Connecticut? I don't know. But anyway, so what I am going to talk about today is these things. And I have taken the privilege of sort of deciding what I want to do and doing things that please me in this talk. And so I'm going to give you a lot of the history and background, or some of it, but a lot of the talk is actually going to be a collection of sort of my favorite superstitions through the ages, the greatest hits, according to Stuart Vyse. And there will be a tiny bit about the psychology of superstition, which is the thing I usually talk about the most. But if you have questions about anything having to do with the book or topics that I don't cover, please ask your questions at the end and we'll try to get to them. So it is the story of a word in the sense that it has always been a label that has been applied to something else for the most part, and that something else is something that's not authorized, that is not thought to be good in some way, and so it's always been a fairly negative term, except for a few moments at the very beginning, and then it quickly changed and took off in various different directions. The very beginning of the concept of superstition starts with the Greek word desedaimonia, which for a few minutes, as I say, in the 4th century BCE, actually had a positive connotation. It meant that you were conscientiously religious, that you were pious in the ways that you were supposed to be, in your offerings to the gods, and the ways in which you showed respect to the gods. But within 100 years, it became clear that it was acquiring a negative connotation. And at that point, it was that you were overly religious, excessive in your religious practices, and which seemed to suggest that you were fearful of the gods. And so this was bad for a couple of reasons. One is that the gods were generally thought to be benevolent, and to be fearful of them was not thought to be appropriate. And also that, of course, things were done in moderation, and to be excessive in religiosity was not looked upon well. And so in Latin, the Romans had their version of the same concept was the word superstitio, which is the word from which superstition comes to us. And it did have the same overly fearful of the gods connotation at the beginning, but it began to be applied more generally to other things. And this begins a long history of pointing that word at various targets that were thought to be negative in relation to whatever was accepted and orthodox at the time. One of the things is that throughout all of human history, there have been itinerant magicians and fortune tellers, people who did augury and other kinds of magic, and they also were referred to by the elites as being superstitious or engaging in superstition. And so this was another target of the word early on. And so here's a quick overview just to cut to the chase. I'm going to dip back into some of these after this slide, but it began as good religion, meaning adequately pious. It went on in both Greece and Rome, the Roman world, to be excessively religious, which was not good. Then it became bad religion in the form of itinerant magic, magic of the streets. And then it also began to be applied in some cases against non-Roman religions. So the practices of the Jews and later the Christians were thought to be superstitious. And again, it's simply a way of labeling religious practices that were not accepted by the authority or the elites at the time. Eventually, of course, Rome became a Christian empire, and so suddenly the arrow of indictment pointed back in the other direction. So once it became the Holy Roman Empire, anyone who continued to worship the Roman gods was called superstitious. So what goes around comes around, and of course still the street magicians as well, and so on. Eventually, and I'll get back into some of what went on in Europe before this, but of course eventually the Enlightenment came. The sun opens up and begins to shine, and reason and enlightenment and the age of science begins to change things, and suddenly eventually we get the definition that we have now, which is that a superstition is bad science, is something that is not consistent with science. And that's sort of where we are today, with some exceptions, of course. So I'm going to stop my historical overview and hesitate on the first of my favorite superstitions. And this is a widespread magical practice back in the Greek and Roman era throughout the Mediterranean area. And this is this is called curse tablets. So this is a curse tablet in the picture there, and you can't really make it out, but it's etched with letters on it. And part of what fascinates me about this whole thing is that curses are not really something that we do anymore. Actually, you can buy some curse kits on Etsy or on Amazon, but I don't think they're, it's not widely done. It's probably bad form. It's not a nice thing, even if it's not real, it's not a nice thing to try to curse other people. But it was quite common back then. And it was one of these things that a local magician would help you with. So this is a piece of lead that has been flattened out. And the reason we even know about this is because these objects have lasted and have survived, and they've been translated and categorized. And there are over 1,000 of them that we know of that have been recovered. And so you would go to this fellow. You might not be literate yourself, and so you might need help in doing this. If you were able to do it and had the materials, you could do it yourself without the help of someone else. But you would go to this vendor who would have the lead available for you already. You'd sort of tell them what the story was, who you wanted to curse and why. They would write out sometimes a very long and elaborate curse. And then they would typically roll this lead up. This has been flattened out, but they would typically roll the lead up into a tube. And you notice that there are holes in it. They would tend to drive nails through the tablet. And it wasn't sort of a voodoo thing as much as it was a ritualistic binding of the curse. And it's thought that they would recite some kind of an incantation or spell as they did it. And then typically these were placed near a grave or sometimes in a well. And the reason was that the job of the curse was actually done either by gods or by departed souls, spirits. And so the idea of putting it in a grave would be that there might be the spirit of somebody who recently died just sort of hanging around, and they might pick up the curse and take it and do your bidding for you. And the idea of a well, of course, is nearer the underworld. And so that was the idea. And this was a very common practice in the Greek and Roman world. And the curses fell into various categories. So one thing is that they tended to draw the line at death. They didn't usually, ask for the death of the object of the curse, but they might do legal curses. For example, in the Greek and Roman world, you had to defend yourself in court. And it turned out that people who were good orators or good speakers were more successful in court as a result. And so you might, if you had an opponent in court in a dispute, you might take out a curse against your opponent so that they wouldn't speak well that day in court, and with the hope that you would win. And this was so common that in cases where someone who was known to be a good speaker didn't perform that well, it was assumed that they'd been the victim of a curse. Other uses of curse tablets were in athletic competitions. If this would be like if you were a Red Sox fan and you wanted to, you could pay some money to curse the Yankee pitcher, and that's what they did in those days. And love curses were ones in which typically, you were desirous of somebody who was already involved in a couple. And so you would write out a curse asking that the couple be broken up, something happened to your rival, and that the person you were interested in would only have affection for you. And so there are other uses of them, but these are the kinds of things that these curse tablets were about. This is one of the funniest and most interesting aspects of it to me is that in Bath, England, there is a bath. There is a Roman bath. It actually dates before Roman times, but when Rome had conquered southern England, they came to this place in Bath, and they built a temple around it, and it was a public bath where people would disrobe, go in, frolic for a while, and then come out, and so forth. What happened was that a number of curse tablets were found here. And what they've determined was that apparently when you went into the public bath and you took your clothes off and left your rings and your jewelry by the side of the tub, that was an invitation for a lot of theft. A lot of people's possessions were stolen while they were in the water. So some very clever entrepreneurs set up curse tablet setups. They may have had vending carts or something, but they were right there on the spot to take advantage of the frustration of the bathers. So the person would come out, they'd realize that something had been stolen, and they could immediately go to the vendor and write out a curse, cursing the person who had stolen their stuff. And I doubt that any of it was ever returned. But what's interesting about this is that it undoubtedly, to me at least, it undoubtedly satisfied a psychological urge on the part of the person who was injured, and it's completely different. We do not do this today, and not that I'm recommending that we go back to it, but nonetheless, it is kind of interesting that it must have been somewhat satisfying. Even if you don't get your I'm getting a little bit of feedback.
Sorry about that. Please, everyone, just keep yourself muted. Someone unmuted Stuart, so they're on mute now.
Okay. That's okay. No, I don't. No, we can deal. So, having done that little detour into one of my favorite sort of superstitious things, going back as I said, in Christian Europe, after the Christianity became the dominant religion, there was still some people who continued to worship the pagan gods, now pagan. They were called pagan after the change. There was, of course, lots of itinerant people who would do divination, augury. They would tell the fortune by the flight of birds. When we say something doesn't augur well for the future, that's where it comes from. And there were weather magicians who could control the weather. Sometimes bad weather was blamed on a weather magician. There were curses. And of course, eventually there was witchcraft, which was a huge sort of political movement that was engaged in by both Protestants and Catholics throughout Europe. An unfortunate chapter in the history. But the and I do cover that to some extent in the book, but I won't be able to talk about it more here. I just wanted to point out, though, that the church, of course, had its own magic. It just made a distinction between it and the magic that other people in the streets were engaging in. And interestingly, the church officials typically did not doubt the reality of the magic that other purveyors were doing, the beggar priests and whoever else was out there. What they did say, though, is that that magic, the unacceptable superstitious magic, involved the use of demons. And we have things that we do, and of course everything we do is demon free. We are against the devil. We have our angels, of course, but we are not. We don't engage in demons. And so that was the distinction that they tried to make. And of course, demons were very much involved in the witch craze as well. But at the same time, the church, engaged in activities that were sort of magical looking, at least. And they didn't, and some of these things that were just common notions that the parishioners would have, that there were magical powers associated with the church. The church didn't always necessarily encourage that belief, but they didn't mind it, and they did not do anything to discourage it. And of course, it stemmed from the idea, initially at least, that priests sort of have special powers. They can do special things. The baptism ritual was explicitly an exorcism, right? The driving out the devil. And so therefore, holy water began to have sort of a special significance. At times they had to actually lock up the holy water in the church because people would come and steal it and put it on their crops or put it on their houses in order to avoid a fire or something. Consecrated salt, which was also used in rituals in the church, was thought to have magical powers. And if you could get out of the church with a host, with the bread, then that too had power. So there was a lot of sort of lore about magic in the church, but this was the good magic, not the bad magic. Now, of course, this hasn't all gone away. So I like to throw out here the fact that if you're interested in getting some holy water, you can, for $8.98 on Amazon, get some Jordan River holy water of your own. And I don't know what you would do with it, but if you're interested, it's a fairly small container, I think, and who knows what's in it. But it's not authorized by any church. It's simply that because it comes from the River Jordan, it's thought to have special properties. And of course, this one may be familiar to a number of you, but it turns out that Saint Joseph is a very good realtor. That if this, I think this kit, which is basically just some plastic and cardboard and a little card, this kit goes for about $12 online. And according to the, what they say, if you bury it in the front yard, I think some people say it's better if you bury him upside down and maybe right underneath the realty sign, then your house will just sell just like that, hotcakes. And so there are still forms of sort of what I would call both of these examples superstitions, but they're religiously based and sort of commercial enterprises. Okay, so the Enlightenment came slowly but surely, and so philosophy began to be separated from religion, the age of reason, as it was referred to, and there were many scientific advances that began to emerge in the 17th and 18th centuries. And so gradually, the idea of superstition being inconsistent with science, as science becomes more dominant as a way of measuring the world and understanding the natural world, then superstition became to finally get its last meaning of bad science. And so, but the Enlightenment did not get rid of all superstition. You may have noticed that. It's still around. And it's one of the topics that I write about in the book that is a direct response in some cases to the Enlightenment, an attack or defense against the Enlightenment, is the growth of spiritualism in the 19th century and seances and so forth. And so there were, of course, as you might imagine, many people started at this point in time to have doubts about the reality of certain religious ideas, an afterlife in particular, and other aspects of religion. And so there were some responses, and spiritualism came out of that response to the challenge to religion. It became particularly popular after the Civil War, because so many men did not come home from the war, and there was such incredible loss, and there was a yearning, as is still the case with psychics and so forth. There is a yearning to have contact with the lost person, and so we had seances, and this was spiritualism became very popular in Europe, especially popular in the U.S. and Boston was sort of a hotbed of spiritualist activity. There were spiritualist newspapers in many big cities. And so it became quite the thing. Everybody was sort of discovering their abilities to communicate with the dead and be mediums. And like every third house, there was somebody who could do a seance. Now, some of you may be able to see where I'm heading with this. Some locals may be able to see where I'm heading with this. But one of the outgrowths of spiritualism was the Ouija board. And it was sort of initially introduced as a game, but it was supposed to be a way, or some people believed, that you could communicate with the spirits of the dead. And you see in the Saturday Evening Post, this is a Norman Rockwell cover, the way in which this is actually the way you were supposed to play the game. They have their hands on the pointer, which is called a planchette, and it's designed to be able to move very easily, slide very easily across the table. And then they have the board, on their knees. So it's a deliberately unstable environment. And then the other part of it is that there are always two people playing. You can only do the Ouija board correctly if there are at least two people holding the planchette, which of course starts to sort of muddy up who's moving and who's not moving and so forth. And so people believe that, some people believe that there are some people who are very fearful of the Ouija board because of its connection to spiritualism and so forth. But the reason I do write about the whole spiritualist movement and the Ouija board and other aspects of it in the book, but the reason I brought it up today, I thought I would add a little local angle, which is that since I'm here at the Stonington Free Library, is that down the street, about 3 blocks from here, is the home of the Pulitzer Prize winning poet, James Merrill, where he lived until his death in 1995. This is the building on the left. There are shops on the first floor, apartments on the second floor, and then James Merrill lived with his partner, David Jackson, on the 3rd and 4th floor in a very beautiful arrangement apartment. Merrill was evidently a believer in the ability to use the Ouija board to communicate with spirits from the past, and it became an important influence in his poetry. So here we have a picture on the left of Merrill is on the left with a pen and paper, literally transcribing, writing down what comes through the board. And that's his partner, David Jackson, on the right. And they have, each of them has their hand on a blue willowware cup, which they overturned and used the handle as the pointer. And this was how they did the Ouija board. It was actually, they used a homemade board that they had set up. And this is the room that they did it in on the right. This is one of the room in the dining room in the apartment, where they famously sat at this milk glass table under the tin dome, and for thousands of evenings, over 1,000 evenings, over several decades. Apparently, there was nothing good on TV in those days. They did this as an entertainment, and they loved it, and they transcribed it. And what happened was that out of this came several long epic poems that Merrill wrote. This first one is the Book of Ephraim, and you can see the cover of the book. The cup is on the cover, as is the Ouija board that they used, and they actually believe that they were communicating with a spirit. This is the first emergence of the spirit, Ephraim, who describes himself as a Greek Jew born in AD 8 in Xanthos, right? And so everything that's written in all caps in this poem, which is many pages long, is directly what they got from the board through the transcription of the board. So they clearly believed that they were communicating, and they communicated with friends of theirs in town who had recently died. They also communicated with famous people like William Yeats, the poet, and W.H. Auden. And so they appear to believe that they were in fact communicating with the dead. And the poems are beautiful, but there are pages where there's nothing but these all caps transcriptions from the Ouija board. So an interesting local angle to spiritualism and the Ouija board. So, I mean, it does sort of beg the question, is a seance superstitious? And I think it's worth pausing for a second, because it applies to other superstitions as well. I think it depends on how you approach it, how you think of it. It is first of all, the Ouija board is inconsistent with science. Excuse me. Inconsistent with science. We don't think that there's any way. We have no real evidence that you can communicate with the dead this way. If you see, however, the seance as just an entertainment of some kind, fun, right? The way you might see going to a magic show or having your fortune told, then I don't think it's a superstition. I think it's just for fun. But if you actually believe that you might be able to contact loved ones, especially if you're then paying money to do so or asked to pay money to do so, then I think it crosses the line and does become a superstition. It is both pragmatic and it is inconsistent with science. And those are sort of the two features that are required to be a superstition. Since we've reached the Enlightenment and we're now at the modern age of superstition, we might pause and just talk about what the definition is, and there is none. So I've just sort of stepped in and made my own. But it is I would define it as having the two major qualities. It's inconsistent with what we know about science, and it is pragmatic in some way. And so for example, you could think of it over on the right, I've got a little diagram. You could think of it as being a subgroup of subset of paranormal beliefs. So, people believe in ESP, they believe in ghosts, they believe in many things that would not be consistent with science, but they're not necessarily pragmatic. No one really tries to harness, typically people don't try to harness ESP to give them good luck or bad luck. Or anything else in their lives. Superstitions do fall into that category where you're either trying to avoid bad luck or bring good luck or do something else pragmatic. I also think that I noticed that I mentioned culture fair. This is all hinging upon the idea that science is sort of the accepted measure in your culture. And if it's not, and there are some cultures that have not adopted what we would consider Western scientific thinking as their main standard, then it wouldn't be fair to call them superstitious as a result. In my view, for a similar reason, I give children a pass. There are lots of beliefs. In fact, we're guilty of teaching children a lot of superstitions, and yet they're not fully educated into the system of thought that we call science or reason, and so I don't blame them for that until they get older. A word about the number 13, which is probably the most common of the Western superstitions. I will if you have questions about other common superstitions, we can do that later. But it is true that many people are afraid of the number 13 or have feelings about it. I love this Gallup poll in 2005, which found that 13% of people said that if they were placed on the 13th floor of a hotel, that they would be bothered by that. That's a lovely coincidence that it was that percentage. And 9% said that they would be bothered so much that they would ask for a different room. And of course, as a straight, this poll was probably commissioned by the Hotel Association or something. I don't know. It was a Gallup poll, but the simple solution that they've landed on, of course, is to skip the 13th floor on the elevator buttons and to pretend that there is no 13th floor. No one seems to question when they're told that they're put on the 14th floor. And a survey was done of buildings in New York City a few years back, and it determined that that of all the buildings in the city that could have a 13th floor, something like 80% did not have a 13th floor. So it's clearly a business decision to avoid that. This is a fascinating. Now we're now into the hit parade of my favorite superstitions, and I hope you enjoy them too. This is an amazingly widespread belief that as a Midwesterner growing up in a sort of default Protestant family, I had never heard of. And I had never heard about it until well into my teaching career, and a student told me about it. It has become much more popular now because of the jewelry connection, I believe. But the evil eye is a widespread belief, envy-based belief that is popular in South Asia, in the Middle East, in parts of Europe, and in South America. Not so much here, unless you have an immigrant group from one of those places. It is envy-based in the sense that typically someone might be afraid that the thing that they really cherish will be damaged or taken away from them. Babies are often the object of worry because they're so beloved, and so the idea is that somebody who wants to do harm could simply by looking, if the person has the evil eye, simply by looking at the baby could do harm to it or steal it or something. And it also is the explanation for bad health in some cases. But it's a belief that has all different cultural variations on it, and I find it fascinating because of that, and because I didn't know anything about it before. But what you have here on this slide on the left is a Turkish Nazar, which is a piece of jewelry. Actually bought it in town here at Ann Fix's Turkish store, a pop-up store, and it is a blue glass, quite beautiful, that can be displayed in your home. It's worn as necklaces, and it has an eye shape in it, and it is, again, the two that have eyes built into them. The idea is that the evil eye will be attracted to it and perhaps be bounced back at the bad person who sent the waves. And so at some point, the Turkish airline, I believe, had this symbol on the tail of their airplanes. On the opposite side, you have the Hamsa, which is popular in the Middle East and also worn as jewelry. And it also has an eye, sort of a hand shape, and it has an eye in the middle of it. The horn in the middle is an Italian version of a piece of jewelry that is supposed to somehow distract the evil eye away from it. So it's a fascinating thing that it's very ancient. It's in the Bible. It's an old fear, and shows up in different cultures in different ways. There are other superstitious systems that I am interested in the sort of more complicated ones as well as the simple ones. I'll throw out two that will probably maybe upset some people in the audience. I hope not, but astrology does not, and I hope I'm not upsetting anyone, but astrology does not stand up to test. It has been tested several times, and there is no evidence that the condition of the stars at your birth or the moon or any of that stuff matters in terms of your personality or anything else. So astrology would be, in my view, considered an elaborate superstition, inconsistent with science, and yet people do make decisions on the basis of it and so forth. So there's that. Another large system that I would consider superstitious is homeopathy or homeopathic medicines. This might be also upsetting to somebody in the audience, I don't know. But homeopathy is a pseudoscientific theory of medicine. It actually has a kind of an interesting history. It began in the 19th century in Germany and came to the US. But the theory of it, and one of the aspects of the theory of homeopathy is that medicines are more powerful the more diluted they are. And so this is a collection of medicines that all of which are basically placebos that can't have any active ingredient. They're really diluted. They're sold as if they're medicine, and placebos have effects, of course, but these are not saying this is a placebo. They're saying this is a medicine, and they're prescribed for various ailments, and there's literally no evidence that they can be, that either that they could be effective or that they are effective. The fact that they're diluted is, in some cases, really good, because a couple of the herbs that are used for homeopathic medicines are, in stronger forms, are poisonous. So anyway, I would also consider this a superstition. I can't leave the subject without mentioning the topic of personal superstition. So it is the case that we've been talking a lot about the culturally or socially shared superstitions that we all learn as a group. But people also have personal superstitions that in many cases they've come across by trial and error. It's likely that you have to be a superstitious person as a given first. It has to be an open possibility for you. But then by trial and error, things happen. And so here are a couple examples of personal superstitions. On the left, you may recognize Taylor Swift, who was born on December 13th and thinks that the number 13 is lucky for her. I don't think there's any evidence that it's lucky for her at all, but I'm actually quite thankful that she is such a popular person and that she has made this public, because it demystifies the number 13. I actually believe that when it comes to the negative superstitions like 13, we would all have been better off if no one ever taught them to us. She's doing some good by demystifying it a little bit. And on the right, you may recognize the former president of the United States, Barack Obama, who has a superstition that he must play basketball on election days. He writes about this briefly in the new autobiography, and he does refer to it as a superstition. So there you go. He liked to play basketball on the campaign trail a lot on his own anyway, but he organized a game, a pickup game on the date of the Iowa caucuses in 2008. And of course, he won the Iowa caucus. And then the next contest was the New Hampshire primary. And for whatever reason, he didn't organize a game on election day that day, and he lost to Hillary Clinton. So that was it. He was locked in. And from then on, both in 2008 and in 2012, he organized a pickup game. And as you know, he won both of those elections. So there you go. The guy at the bottom is Rafael Nadal, who is one of the most superstitious athletes you'd ever want to know. He pulls at his shirt a million times. He has a number of rituals. He claims they're not superstitions, by the way. There is a stigma, and so he can't avoid comment on them. But he claims they're not superstitions, just rituals or whatever. And that's an interesting question too. Again, like the seance, it's sort of like, how do you think about this thing? But he's got two bottles there that he's organizing in a specific way that he likes. One of them has cold water in it, and the other one has warm water in it. And so there you go. Lots of people have personal superstitions. I'm sure some of you in the audience may. Okay, this is the last and only thing I'm going to say about the psychology of superstition, which is normally what I talk about the most. But why do people believe in it today in a world where we have so much science around us and we're so aware of how science works and how powerful it can be? Well, I mean, some of it has to do with simply growing up in a family or in a culture that gives credence to it. And if you begin it at a young age and begin using superstitions early, then it's hard to break out of that sometimes. There's no question that for many things, and you can see it in some of the things I mentioned so far, that these things do help with anxiety, that in the moment while you're exercising the superstition, that they must make the person feel somewhat better, or else why would they do them if they didn't have that effect? And there are many situations in which something important is about to happen. There's nothing you can do that would tangibly affect the outcome. Like if you imagine an athlete waiting to go on the field or whatever, you can't practice any longer. There's nothing you can do, but you have to fill that time. So those superstitions undoubtedly help with anxiety, and they also provide a sense of control. In a situation, many of the cases where superstition is most likely to occur are ones where we really don't have as much control over the outcome as we would like. We want the thing to happen very badly, but we can't be certain it will. And so doing a superstition, even if there's no chance that it could have an outcome, it makes a person feel better. And some people say that, and quite consciously, they will say, I know this is silly, but I will feel better if I do it. And that's a very human and I think understandable predicament to be in. So that's that. And I think that's where I leave off for now. That's what I had planned for you today. Except for, I'd be happy to take your questions.